Episode 3, A Relaxed Heart. For the quick tip, we're going to go over ways to build up your training and your programming, your regular training, workout programming, and matching that up with your nutritional programming, right? Basically, in short, training in seasons, right? For the main topic, and it's a doozy, we're going to discuss one part of the S.C.A.L method, which is the case for emotional fitness, essentially, right? Fitness for your emotional heart. Let's word that a little differently. For our random topic number 1, we're going to go over a video I saw, an interview I saw of a former atheist converting to Christianity and how he arrived at Christ intellectually. It was very interesting, right? And for the random topic number 2, and this might be another doozy as well, Caitlin Clark drama. Everything surrounding Caitlin Clark, her entering into the WNBA, and kind of how the WNBA is fumbling the bag. Anyway, I'm Coach Evan. This is Say Cheese and Lift Studio, and you're listening to the S.C.A.L Method podcast. Let's go get it. Here we go. We're going to talk about training in seasons, basically, and how do you set that up and how do you match up your nutrition with your training, okay? So here's what I propose, right? You train in the 3 different styles of basic styles of training, right? So you have your strength training, you have your bodybuilding, and then you have your athletic training or power training, right? And then, you want to add on the dreaded cardio training as well, right? And so the way I propose that you set it up could match up pretty well and is really, really good for overall fitness and overall health, okay? So here's where you start. Whatever it is, you start off with a strength training program. So maybe that's 6 to 8 weeks, or maybe it's a couple strength training programs. I wouldn't want to go more than, I wouldn't want to go more than 6 months in to that, for that initial strength training program, okay? So this is why I suggest somewhere around 2 months, okay? So again, we'll keep it at weeks though, 6 to 8 weeks of a strength training program. And you want to split that program out into 2 distinct sections. So half of it will be just getting the mechanics down. So you're not really worried about progression in the first half. Just get the weights set up initially and find out where you really are, right? And then also get the mechanics down, make sure you're locking in form, okay? Then for the second half is where you want to start to progress. So the first 3 to 4 weeks, worry about the mechanics, worry about actually getting what your base weight is, okay? Then for the second half, for the next 3 to 4 weeks, that's when you worry about adding weight to the bar or adding weight, picking up heavier dumbbells or what have you. That will be your initial foundational program. We got to start with strength, okay? So now you have a choice after that strength program. You have a choice to go either bodybuilding or athletic or power training. It doesn't matter which one you go to, right? Or which one you go to first, because you're going to have to go to the other one afterwards. So let's just say for this example, we're going to go bodybuilding training first, right? So we're going to go bodybuilding first, do another 6 to 8 weeks of bodybuilding, right? And that one is, full go, because remember, you have the foundation already in place. So you're just focusing on building up as much lean muscle tissue as possible over those 6 to 8 weeks. That one, you can also stretch just a little bit more. So you might be able to go up to 12 weeks, right? So again, for this example, we're doing 6 to 8. And then after you get the bodybuilding block out of the way, you switch then to athletic training, power training, right? And again, in this instance, we're doing bodybuilding first and then athletic training, but you can always do right after the strength, you can go straight into athletic training. And they both translate really well coming off of a strength program, okay? So again, in this instance, we went strength, bodybuilding, then we're going to go athletic training for another 6 to 8 weeks. Same idea here. And the whole point of this part or that section or that training block is to get you to move better. Okay. So we're not necessarily saying that you're just going to be jumping everywhere, but you're going to be moving a lot better. There is where you want to focus on mobility and force production in that sense, where it's just like you want to be able to move around well. Of course, you will have to train around injuries if anything like that is there or present. But at the end of the day, the point of that 6 to 8 weeks is to just get you to move a little bit better. Okay. Then after that, you want to go into around 3, 4, or maybe about around 3, 4 weeks of just cardio training. And I know that sounds absolutely terrible, but you want to do 3 to 4 weeks of some form of, like, it could be, treadmill, assault bikes, rowing, sled tank pushes, whatever it may be. But that would be your program. No lifting. Okay. Right. Or you could do lifting, just really, really light and really, really fast pace. So we're basically turning resistance training into a cardio workout, which is, just as good. You could do that as well if you really, really like lifting like I do. So that's what I do. But ultimately, you're going to want to get on a treadmill or something like that, or you want to go out running, or you want to do some biking, or you want to do some rowing, or you want to do some pushing or something like that, because we want to increase our VO2 max. So those 3 to 4 weeks of the cardio training is solely meant to increase your VO2 max, increase or improve your heart health. Okay. Now, what are we doing around that? Let me backtrack a little bit. It's okay if you end up doing some of the cardio training throughout the first 3 blocks, okay? It's just not going to be the entirety of your program. So, like, you could do cardio warming up, right? But don't do 30 minutes of cardio and then decide that you're going to start lifting. It doesn't work that way, right? And also, we want to consider the mode of cardio that we're doing, and like how often we're doing it in conjunction with our diet, right? Because the number one thing that tends to go around is that if you really want to lose weight, you got to do a lot of cardio, or you got to do some cardio, or cardio is necessary to lose weight at all in the first place. And none of that is necessarily true. Okay. There are plenty of people who lose weight and don't do a lick of cardio. The main idea for this cardio, like I said, is to increase VO2 max, which is really to improve your heart health. That's all we're worried about here, okay? Now, how do you match up your diet with this? How do you match up your nutrition with this? Most of the time that you're in these programs, you're going to be at maintenance calorically, but you're going to have one bulk phase and one cut phase, okay? So starting off with the strength training in terms of your programming, you'll start there, and then that will probably be at maintenance. And then what I will want you to do is when you go into the bodybuilding phase, I want you to start the bulk then, because that'll help you basically increase lean muscle tissue, right? So you want to kind of you want these to work in conjunction here. Then by the time you get to your power program, you would want to match that up with a cut. Okay. Now, when you get to the cardio portion of it, I actually don't want to cut there. Okay. One of the worst things you can do is to continue to cut past the resistance training program in which you're just doing cardio and you're taking in less cardio or taking in less calories. What's going to happen is you're going to burn through the lean muscle tissue that you gained in the bodybuilding stage. Okay. And lean muscle tissue is super important for your life, period, right? Like you can't afford to lose lean muscle tissue. And so the goal here is to build the lean muscle tissue, keep the lean muscle tissue, burn the fat, improve heart health. That's it. So that's why we organize it in this way. That's why we break it out this way. So you want to bulk during the bodybuilding stage. You want to start your cut during the power stage whenever you have that set up. And you want to be at maintenance for strength and maintenance for your cardio. Okay. Now, your maintenance for your strength, the strength block, and your maintenance for the cardio block is probably going to be pretty different. Okay. Because it's not likely that you're going to gain the exact amount of lean muscle tissue and the exact amount of weight during the bulk phase and then cut the exact amount of lean muscle tissue and cut the same amount of fat on during your power or athletic phase, okay? So chances are your maintenance at the beginning is going to be different than your maintenance at the end, and that's okay. All right, you have to be patient with this process here, okay? So let me break it all down again for you, right? You programmatically, you want to start off with a strength program, 6 to 8 weeks. Then you can move into bodybuilding or athletic training, one of those, 6 to 8 weeks. Then you want to take the bodybuilding or the athletic training, the one that you didn't do, another 6 to 8 weeks. And then you want to finish off with 3 to 4 weeks of a cardio program. All the while, you're at maintenance for strength, you're at a bulk or cut for your bodybuilding or power athletic training phase, right? So either, depending on if you start with the power training, if you're power training, you're cutting. If you're bodybuilding, you're bulking, okay? So whichever combination you have that going on, then that's what you do. And then you go back down to maintenance or back up to maintenance, whatever that may be, for your cardio training, okay? Run through those a couple times, and you'll definitely start to see a difference in just your looks in general, right? You'll definitely start to see a difference in the scale if you track it that way. You'll definitely start to see a difference in body fat percentage, and you'll start to feel better because ultimately, again, you'll have a healthier heart and you'll be moving better. Now, there's a couple little caveats here, right? When you're bulking, make it clean. Right? Don't start going to McDonald's and everywhere. Like don't do that. Because it completely defeats the purpose of doing this in the first place, right? So clean bulk as much as you can. And I think in terms of macros, bulk with extra additional carbs or fats, okay? Keep your proteins at an even level here. Now, when you're cutting, elevate the proteins, okay? And I think that's all, that's a way you can work that out, right? And you will definitely see some results off of that alone, okay? All right, so now we have our doozy of a main topic, a relaxed heart. All right, so I'm pretty amped up about this part here, right? So we finally get to go over a portion of the S.C.A.L method here in a sound heart, right? So what is a sound heart? What does it mean? How do we, maneuver that, right? That because our heart is a part of our entire being, right? So what is a sound heart, right? A sound heart, in simple terms, is the proper regulation of one's emotions. Okay. Now, I understand that in a few other instances, having a sound heart essentially means not just your emotions, but the entirety of your being. But for this case, in this instance, I'm going to make an argument for your sound heart being the regulation of your emotions. And I'm going to break that down to a point where there will be something actionable that you can do. Because, what are your, if we just broke right into it, what are your emotions then in this case, right? So a sound heart is proper regulation of one's emotions. But what are your emotions? Your emotions, basically, that's the innate response to the things that surround you, right? You can't turn them off. Right? It's unhealthy to do so, it's unhealthy to try, right? But we can manage them and we can train them. And I think that's the part that people forget the most. We can train our emotions, right? So how do you do that, right? And I'll get to that later on. Again, we have a lot of stuff to get through here, right? So what I'm going to go to the Bible to start here. Okay, there's this one verse in particular that I really want to. This is going to be our starting point. Okay, all right. So it's in Proverbs, chapter 14, verse 30, and it says, "A sound heart is the life of the flesh, but envy the rottenness of the bones." Okay. Now, right off the bat, you see, right, or you hear right in there is sound heart. So we have to discuss what is sound, what is heart, right? So sound in this case, well, why don't we just take that word, break that down? What is sound in English, right? Sound means at peace. It means not easily wavered by external forces. It also means free from decay, damage, or injury. Okay? That's what sound means in English, right? But because this was in Proverbs and this was originally written in Hebrew, what does that word sound break down to in Hebrew? So sound breaks down into a Hebrew word marpe, okay, which further breaks down into another word called rafe, okay? And that word basically means healed, and that's the root word for relaxed, okay? Basically healed and relaxed, which kind of, dovetails or kind of goes into the English version of this definition as well. Remember, is at peace, free from decay, injury, or damage, right? So that's kind of the healed part. And relaxed is at the peace part, right? So you break that down. So we have what sound means. So again, sound, relaxed, peaceful, not easily wavered. And now what is your heart here? And your heart in this instance is your entire emotional nature and understanding. Okay? So like this is where like your emotional intelligence will come into play. Now, I understand, like, because I'm using the Bible, and a lot of times where the Bible says something about your heart, the Bible actually means, or that author in particular means, your entire being, including your mind and your spirit. And I'm making a case basically saying that this verse, Proverbs 14:30, isn't talking about your entire being, but it's talking about your emotional being. Why do I say that? Because the very next line in that verse talks about an emotion that's detrimental to you. So you can assume that they're talking about an emotion to start off with that's giving you the topic at hand, right? Speaking of which, it says, but envy, the emotion, is rottenness to the bones. And that's a big one there. So it's just like, so now you have to ask the question, what is envy, right? And what a lot of people tend to do is they tend to mix up envy. And I mean, look, this is believers, non-believers, everybody mixes up envy and jealousy. I cannot shake from my mind that there's so many people that preached to me and told me and I've read all this literature on how both envy and jealousy are interchangeable. And they're not, right? And they're definitely quite different things here, right? So envy is basically that feeling of resentment you feel towards someone because of something they have, whether that be some luck or some item or something that they have or some quality that they own or some situation that they find themselves in. And you don't have it, they do, and you feel some type of way that they have it, right? That's different than jealousy. Jealousy is more of a protective feeling. And jealousy is the feeling that you get that's similar to envy, but it's feeling that you get when threatened with the idea of losing something that you have to someone else or to some other situation or to some other thing, okay? Why do I say that, right? Because biblically, envy breaks down into one of the 7 deadly sins, right? It's not good for you. It's bad. And even in this verse right here, it says envy is rottenness to the bones, right? So envy is not desirable here, right? But jealousy is different. Jealousy, I mean, if you go back to Exodus 20, verse 5, it says that God is jealous. So if these two words are so interchangeable and we have envy being one of the 7 deadly sins, how on earth do we get to a point where we're saying that God is a sinner? It's not the same thing. Jealousy is not the same thing as envy. You can't, and so ultimately, and I know how people try and over explain it where they're just like, well, no, this is spiritual jealousy. This is righteous jealousy. So can sin be righteous? I mean, as far as what I've read, that doesn't work. I might be wrong about that one, but just kind of using common sense here, that doesn't add up properly. Okay, so let's pull out a little bit here. And he said this emotion, this envy, is rottenness to the bones. Okay, but a sound heart is life to the flesh. Okay. So let's start with that again, with that other portion, life to the flesh. What does that mean, right? So we're not talking about life to the flesh in terms of the spiritual flesh, because the spiritual flesh is something that we're always spiritually working against, right? That's not desirable. Again, we're supposed to decrease in the flesh and increase in the spirit. So if a sound heart is supposed to increase the life of the flesh, I'm pretty sure it's not talking about life of the spiritual flesh. So then what's the other one? The physical flesh. So a sound heart is life to your body. Now we're cooking. A sound heart, a relaxed and healed, a peaceful heart that's not easily wavered, a heart that's free from injury, damage, or decay, is life to your body. It adds years to your physical body. It's life to your physical self. That's amazing. And it's sitting right there, right? So the opposite is envy. Envy, again, one of the 7 deadly sins. Again, that feeling of resentment towards somebody else because of something they have or something they're involved in, something that's attributed to them, right? In other words, it's very closely tied with covetousness, which is a problem, right? It's a problem. So you have this emotion here, and it is rottenness to your bones. And what are your bones? In this case, it comes from the word etsem, and that basically is used to represent the entirety of the person. So think about that for a second, right? We're talking about our emotional heart, and we're talking about having peace in the emotional heart. And when you don't have peace in your emotional heart, you have rottenness to your bones, or to the entirety of your being. So that's your mind, that's your emotional self again, and that's your physical body. It's rottenness, that's death and decay to your overall body. So think about it, right? You have a sound, peaceful heart. The sound heart adds years to your life. So the opposite takes years away. And that's a simple way to put it, right? Why is it important for your heart to be in good condition in that respect? Why is it important for you to have the proper regulation of your emotions? Well, physically, unregulated emotions is a killer, right? It leads to immune dysfunction. It leads to high blood pressure. It leads to chronic disease and chronic sickness. It leads to the inability to regulate blood sugar. It leads to the inability for your neurons to fire off properly. It shows up physically in a number of different ways, and it makes perfect sense that technically leads you closer to death. And it's crazy. I mean, have you ever met someone who was completely controlled by their anger? Do they look healthy? Now we're getting to the meat of this here, right? So we understand what a sound heart is, right? We understand why it's important. Now, how do you train it, right? How do you train your emotional being, right? And this is the beauty of the S.C.A.L method, because what you do basically is utilize the other three arenas of your being to train that one, right? So you would use your mind, you would use your body, you would use your soul, all three to train your emotions, to train and to help you regulate your emotions. So let's start with your mind, right? You first have to train a particular way of thinking, okay? And you start that by you started by mindfulness, right? And I know it's kind of like a buzzword that kind of just goes around. It's like, well, what is mindfulness, right? So, like, what do you really have to think about, or what is a way of thinking that's going to allow you to regulate your emotions? You train your emotions by thinking, right? So, like, within your brain, in the actual, physical sense, the parts of the brain that are responsible for emotional regulation is different than the parts of the brain from where the emotion comes from in the first place, right? So there's two different sections. So you're actually using part of your brain to work on and affect the other part of your brain, and it all works together. And hopefully it works in a proper way. In a healthy individual, that's the way it goes, right? So the first thing you do, though, is you train it by thinking. And one of the best ways to do that is starting off with meditation. And what do you meditate on? Like, what are you supposed to think about here, right? So first things first, you need to beef up your emotional intelligence. In other words, the first thing you got to think about is, what is it that you are feeling? So name the feeling. What are you feeling at that point in time, right? The next thing that you want to work on then after that, or the next thought in line, is you name the feeling, and then you have to accept the feeling, right? You can't just, bottle it up. You can't suppress it, right? You have to accept the fact that, like, this happened and you feel some type of way about it. You have to accept the fact that you might be angry about this thing. You accept the fact that you might be scared of this thing, or you might actually feel that envy, right? Like, you have to accept it, though, right? You can't get to a point where you're trying so hard to suppress it and shut it off that you end up kind of like shutting yourself down completely. It's not healthy, and that's how a lot of people end up depressed in the first place, right? So you have to first name it, then accept it, right? Then you have to figure out what caused it. Why do you feel the way you feel, right? Name it, accept it. Now, why did it happen, right? So that requires some analysis. That requires some reflection. And that's what's really good to meditate on, right? And finally, what you want to do is you want to figure out a way to express it properly. So again, you don't want to suppress it, you don't want to bottle it up, you don't want to close it off, but you want to express it in a healthy manner, right? So for instance, take anger, and you're mad about something. The way to express it would not be to just lay into every single person that you come in contact with, right? You have to figure out, first of all, again, name it, it's anger, right? Accept it. Okay, I'm mad. All right. Okay, cool. I'm not going to try and hide it up. I'm not going to hide it. I'm not going to try and act like I'm not mad. I'm not going to pretend that everything's great. I'm mad right now. Then at that point, you figure out, like, okay, what caused it? Okay, what made me mad? Okay, so name it, accept it, figure out what caused it, and then figure out how to express it. So it's like, I'm mad. It's okay to be mad, so I'm not going to try and hide it. What made me mad? This situation, some situation made me mad. Now, how do I express that anger? Okay, you want to think about these things, because a lot of times, especially with anger, we're just going to react, right? And that's the worst thing you can do. Don't just pop off, bang, right there. You train your emotions by thinking, but you have to slow down enough to actually think about this stuff. And I figured out, like, I heard a really good way, and honestly, I think I heard this from a boxing coach. basically you want to learn how to respond, not react, right? And I think I heard that phrase from a bunch of different people before, but you want to learn how to respond, right? So that means you have to kind of analyze the situation at hand, and then you give the proper response, not react where you're not thinking about it at all and you just jump, right? So that's part of what, you should meditate on. And a word about meditation, right? Anytime I bring up the word meditation, and I was actually one of these people, but it's just like every time I bring it up, I kind of just like, well, okay, well, I can't just clear my mind. And that's not at all what meditation is really supposed to be, right? In other religions, I guess, the idea of meditation is this emptying of oneself. And so what I'm saying meditation really is actually the filling of yourself up. Like you're filling yourself with these ideas, right? Because again, in other religions, I'm not bashing any of them or anything like that. In other places, the main idea of meditation is to release desires so that you can release pain and whatever. But and that's very hard for humans to do. Let's just put it that way. So instead, this meditation is actually a hyper focus on the emotional self so that you don't become reactionary. Okay? So the more you focus on it, the more you can respond instead of reacting. And that's really it. Okay? Now, the next thing you want to think about, the next thing you want to meditate on, the thing you want to focus on is a two-parter here, right? So you want to focus on who you are. So, and that's a deep, like, existential question here. Who are you, right? And in a lot of cases, so I can only speak from like Christianity, right? Like, we're told who we are, right? And I know that sounds a little bad, but it's also really, really good because it gives us some grounding. It gives us an understanding of of the type of characteristics that we should exhibit, right? But outside of outside of Christianity, right, it's just one of those things where it's just like you want to focus on who are you, who are you as a person, as an individual? What kind of character do you possess, right? And it's important to think about that, right? So then the next thing in line that you want to consider after that is who do you want to be? And that's again, we're getting all types of existential here. So hopefully it don't cause any existential crises around there. But those are two questions you really, really want to meditate on. You want to think about, right? You want to be intentional about answering those two questions. Who are you and who do you want to be? Because that's going to direct your actions a little bit, but that's also going to train your emotions up, because then you're going to know how to feel about certain things, and you're not just going to you're not going to react just off the cuff, like, certain things that previously got you mad probably won't get you mad anymore once you understand who you really are and who you want to be. Right? So this is it's part of the process here, part of the meditation process, right? Part of the thinking process, part of using your mind to train your emotions, right? These are the things you want to consider, okay? And in that, there's this big one here, right? And it's called framing or reframing. Reframe what the situation is. Remember before, so at the very beginning, you're meditating on, you're identifying the feeling, then you're accepting it, then you're figuring out what caused it, and then you're figuring out a way to express it in a proper manner, right? All this thought that's going into those four, you can utilize the tool of reframing. And reframing is something that we have different than any other species, any other animal, any other living organism on the face of this planet. We have the great ability to frame and reframe, right? That we are on some other intelligence level here that allows us to reframe things. And this is especially good for stuff, when it comes to like trauma, okay? And people that go through traumatic experiences and then they have relatively a severe, I guess, or severely unregulated emotions at that point where they get triggered by certain things. Triggered, right? That getting triggered is basically unregulated emotion, right? So a way to kind of move past trauma to move towards a state of regulating those emotions, you reframe what happened in the past, right? Reframing is a tool that we can use to change the past, present, and future, right? So it's just like, for instance, if I were to reframe something that happened in the past, and it was, let's just say I was picked on as a kid in school, I could, one, say I was picked on as a kid in school and it was terrible. Or I can reframe that and still telling the truth and still being realistic and say, I was picked on as a kid in school and it toughened me up. So now when I'm an adult, I don't easily get swayed or bothered by bully tactics. Something like that, right? But you're able to reframe what happened to you in the past in order to regulate how you respond. And that's the main point of reframing here. In this case, for your emotional self, it is to change your innate response to whatever that situation or whatever situation comes up, right? So reframing is a big tool to use to regulate and to improve the fitness of your emotional self. So how do you use now your physical body to regulate your emotions? Okay. Number one, the most obvious one, exercise, right? Release those endorphins, right? The endorphins, the feel good hormone, all that feel good chemical stuff. It makes you feel good, both short term and long term, right? Long term, especially, right? So exercise, we're going to be digging into that over and over again. So I think you get the point by now, right? Engage in active breath work. Okay. So inhale deeply. Use the diaphragm to exhale slowly and controlled, right? That kind of activates the parasympathetic nervous system, brings you down a little bit, takes you further away from that fight or flight response, right? But it also kind of allows you to kind of regulate and like just keep even all the way through, right? So engage in some breath work. And those are the two big things, right? Exercise and engage in breath work. And you can even do both of those, right? Exercise and then engage in breath work right after you're exercising. Typically that leads to you being able to, bring it back down and come back down off of the sympathetic nervous system being all like super hyperactive, right? So you could do those two things for your physical body. And and I know it's short, but I don't want you to think that it's not as important. Like a proper exercise program is super, super important in you regulating your emotions. Okay. They all work hand in hand. So you can't just neglect the body and try to work on everything else, right? You need to work on everything same time, right? Okay, now in a spiritual sense, from your soul, how do you use your soul and how do you utilize your spirit to train your emotional self, right? So I'm gonna break down some more verses here, right? But I'm not gonna go into like an all the great amount of detail for each one. Just a couple of them that I want to read, and then I'll give you the rest of them, right? So first things first, we want to start with the idea is basically to focus on God's word. So again, you're training your emotions. You're helping your emotional self regulate, basically by focusing on God's word from a spiritual sense, right? So you focus on God's word, and I'm going to go to Philippians 4:6, right? It says, "Be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Okay. And so we have that one, and that breaks that down real quick, right? And then basically you want to, and essentially that's saying focus on truth. Focus on truth, and you will have that peace, the peace of the Lord with you in your hearts and in your minds. Okay. So then we go on to Galatians 5:16-23, Romans 15:13, John 14:16. And that's basically just saying lean on the Holy Spirit. Okay. And then you have Galatians 6:1-10, 2 Corinthians 1:3-5, and Proverbs 27:9. That says lean on someone else. So that it also kind of pumps up the importance of having someone around you that's able to help lift you up as well. So, friends, right? And I'm going to end the spiritual section, I guess, if you want to call it that, with Isaiah 26, verse 3. And it simply says, "Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee, because he trusteth in thee." Perfect peace for those whose minds are focused on the Lord. Okay? So that is a sound heart. That is that is what a sound heart is. We broke it down into each individual component here. We explained why it's important. We understood, and we explained how to train it, and train it in your mind, how to train it physically, and how to train it spiritually, right? You want to focus on those things that we just laid out, and watch this episode again, because it's a lot of info and a lot of things to go through. But that's how you do it. And that's part one of the S.C.A.L method here, right? That is your pathway towards emotional fitness. Okay. All right. So now we can get on to some random things. All right. Let's do some random things. All right. So for our first random topic, I want to talk about this interview I saw on YouTube again. Surprise, surprise. But it was an interview with this gentleman by the name of Sebastian Braxton. Look, these cats got some interesting. They got some interesting names out here. But look, Sebastian Braxton, if that's his real name, I'm pretty sure it is. But just very interesting names, right? Nobody has the plain names anymore. But Sebastian is this guy who went from atheism to Christianity, and he was just describing that road, how he arrived at Christianity, and I found it to be very, very interesting because, like, he's not the first person that I heard of, arriving at Christianity. From like seemingly the opposite side of the spectrum here, right? Like I'm hearing a lot of different people arrive at Christ, and in Sebastian's way, he arrived at Christ intellectually, right? Which also kind of reminds me of like a C.S. Lewis, right? C.S. Lewis was an atheist, and he arrived at Christ, and he's probably one of the greatest Christian intellectual minds, I guess, to have existed. Period. So it's just very interesting to see this gentleman go from one end of the spectrum to the complete opposite end, and get there through his intellect, right? And that says a lot in a way that, like, God is calling a lot of different people from a lot of different industries, from a lot of different places, and it's just not just one single spot. Like, I'm hearing of MIT professors going from atheism to Christianity, right? Like, I'm hearing of different psychologists, different professors of all sorts, different like bricklayers. Scientists, historians. Like, they're coming from like everywhere, and they're all landing on Christianity. And I think it's very it's very interesting, right? Because I come from a kind of a background in which I guess I'll explain like a little bit of it. Like when I first just became a believer, I actually got there emotionally, and what I found was that I really didn't actually get there until my intellect got there. So and what I'm saying is like a lot of times a lot of these churches, and I'm not in the business of church bashing, but you can kind of see like what's going on here. A lot of it really comes down to emotional manipulation, and they'll have their little altar call, and they'll say something that'll be like, okay, if you feel like you want to walk up and give your life to Christ and this, that, and the third, and they get into all of their feelings and all that fun stuff, and then these people are going up there giving their lives to Christ, and then when the feeling fades away, when the feeling goes, fades off, and what are they stuck with? They're stuck with their same lifestyle that they had before. So nothing really changed, and I've seen that way too many times. In fact, that's who I was, right? So it's just like emotionally, I was all there, but I was emotionally manipulated, right? And I was taken from a point of emotionality and given this new life supposedly, and then come to find out my life looks exactly the same as it did before. And so that's the kind of like the downside to this emotional manipulation. It still goes on heavy today, right? But it's one of those things where I look at that and I look at different ways that people arrive to Christ. I don't say that I arrived at Christ emotionally, but eventually my intellect took over. It's just like, wait a minute. So in this interview, Sebastian Braxton was talking about how he arrived at Christ and why he ended up there and all that fun stuff. And it was really good. It was a really good interview. And he was pretty clear on a lot of this stuff. And there was just so many sound bites. I wrote a lot of them down actually, right? So one thing that he says that he said in an interview where he's just like faith relies on evidence, not demonstration. And yeah, 100% co-sign with that one, right? Because it's just like it's true, right? Like somebody was going to ask me like, "Yo, prove to me that God exists." I ain't going to do that. How, right? But the real question is there enough evidence that, well, one, Christ walked the earth. Two, Christ said what he said. Three, Christ rose from the dead. Is there enough evidence to believe any of this stuff? Yeah, there's enough evidence. There's enough evidence. I mean, it's like, oh, scientifically proved. Well, which is kind of an oxymoron anyway, but whatever. All that aside, it's just like it really relies on the evidence. Do you have enough evidence? And the great thing about Christianity, and this is what Sebastian said, and this I agree with this wholly, and this is something I was saying for a while now. Christianity allows you to evaluate it from the outside. So you don't have to become a Christian to evaluate Christianity, which is very interesting because a lot of other religions, and I'm not going to tell you which ones I delved into, but or maybe I will at one point. But it was just like a lot of other religions, you have to become a member of that religion to understand what it's about and to fully experience the fullness thereof. Christianity is one of the like only religion. Maybe it's the only religion that you can be a complete atheist and still evaluate Christianity and be able to experience it almost in its entirety right from where you are. It's just it's so whatever. Right, like that. I just find that very interesting, and that it really coincides with my experience in coming to Christianity. Now, I wasn't an atheist. I was just, again, I experienced other religions first before I ended up on Christianity, even though I was, kind of brought up in a loosely Christian household, right? But my parents basically they allowed me to figure it out while giving me some of the building blocks. Okay. Another part that I thought was interesting was that he what fueled his atheism back then was the hypocrisy of Christians. And that one, I didn't necessarily feel particularly convicted by that statement or anything like that, but it was a thought. It was very interesting for somebody to say, "Oh, it's like, yeah, hypocritical Christians," and then it made me think of a whole bunch of other people I know who are not Christian, who are either atheist or agnostic or some other religion altogether because of how Christians are. And I honestly can't say I blame them, right? I get it, All I can speak for is myself and maybe my family. So what I do is I try and represent Christ in every situation, represent Christ to the best of my ability. Now, I'm nowhere near being perfect, but I hope I'm also nowhere near being hypocritical. Right? So yeah, that was the thing that really got me thinking, and of course it kind of helped me because I want to take those parts and kind of just make sure I'm shored up, right? Because ultimately my goal here is to serve people as much as I can for as long as I can, as best I can, and if there's something that I can take from that and kind of implement into my own thing, then I would absolutely do so. And so I was really thinking about that, analyzing it. It made me kind of go think, about like how I present, how I represent Christ, and if I'm doing it in a good, great, okay way, right? There were two parts to like two sound bites, I guess, if you want to call them that. And I'm gonna read them off because I definitely had to write them down. The second one might be paraphrased a little bit, but the first one says this. The first one is basically, and I think he was saying it was like a Jamaican proverb or something like that. I'm not exactly sure about that part, but he was basically saying what he said was, if a person is honestly mistaken, when you tell them the truth, they will either cease to be honest or they will cease to be mistaken, but they can't be both. And man, I'm gonna leave that right there. The second one was, the moment you tell someone the truth that there's evidence to believe in Christ and they still vehemently oppose it, it's no longer a matter of intellect, but it's a matter of the heart, right? Because a lot of intellect, and I mean, that's another great phrase, another great soundbite, I think. And just not even just in terms of soundbite, but that's a great idea. Because, I mean, if you really think about it, if there's evidence, or you have to kind of, it really doesn't come down to belief, right? The belief is based on the evidence, right? If there's evidence that something is there, you basically you almost have to reconsider your positioning. And if you don't, well, now you're not really, it's not an intellectual thing. This is an emotional thing. This is something on the inside. Right? Right. This is something in the heart, right? I think that was just a great phrase. Great phrase. I can't knock it, right? So the overall interview I thought was it was great. It was great. And it also explained a little bit, right? I was vibing with the interview and I understood what Sebastian was talking about because it was cool. It was cool. He talked about the amount of evidence that's in support of Christianity, right? And even down to prophecy. Like he's big into prophecy. I I'm kind of into prophecy, right? But it's just like there's other portions of the Bible in general that, I'm very interested in. But I will not negate the fact that a large portion of the Bible is prophecy. And it's also prophecy that's already came to be. So that's the thing, right? Like if you have evidence to believe that this was written before, a certain thing was written before an event happened, it's like, how do you explain that? It's just like, well, a bunch of people were writing this. Well, were they? Right? Like, I mean, and it's just like, and the thing about it is like the amount of manuscripts that you have for the Bible, whatever. I'm not going to get into all of the minutia here, but there's enough evidence to believe in Christianity. And that's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm leaving it at. I mean, that evidence is what drew me to, and what ended up, I guess, what had me conclude on Christianity in the first place. After observing, after practicing some after trying to understand all other religions. That's how I ended up at Christianity, because it was just like there's enough evidence there, and it didn't it and this is another big point that he was mentioning as well. It's just like it you don't have to turn off your intellect to be a Christian. And it's kind of weird, right? Because it's like there's people out there that assume that because you're faithful and because you're a Christian that you just shut off all intelligence. And it's just like no, that's not the case. In fact, it's the intellect that allows you to draw closer to Christ, right? So I I just I just that part is very interesting to me. How Christians sometimes are seen as the non-intellectual group here when most of the stout Christians arrived at Christ intellectually. It's interesting. So through their thinking, right, and their thinking, is a little on the nose, but it's right on topic, right? So you arrive at Christianity, or they arrived at Christianity intellectually. Why? Because their thinking trained their heart, and their heart changed. God changes the heart, right? Well, how? Well, we're thinking about these things. We're looking at the evidence, and we're going over the validity of the evidence, and then the evidence leads to something much, much greater than what the evidence is, right? So that interview was great. Okay. And I'll leave it at that, right? Let's get on to the random topic number 2. There's going to be a lot of flames with this one. LeBron, Brady, Serena, Tiger, Messi, Phelps, Clark. Listen, Caitlin Clark, former collegiate superstar, now WNBA, I guess you could say superstar, right? She's catching mad heat for no reason. I follow this pretty closely because there's there are a lot of things we can pick from this culturally, first of all, right? And I think there are a few how do I want to say it? Plot holes in this whole situation. So look, let's break down what's actually going on here, right? So Caitlin Clark, WNBA player, now WNBA player, she's a rookie, and she came into the league, into the WNBA, a sport that no one watched. So funny story, when it first came out, I actually watched it. Like, I remember players, because it was around the summertime and it was right after the NBA finals. Like, it was like a dead spot in sports, and I was never really a big baseball fan or anything like that, so I couldn't really care less about baseball. So it was just like, somehow I would just have like the WNBA and like golf on TV, right? And usually, actually, I'm telling y'all too much, but I actually like golf on TV. Like, I could, like, you don't have to sit there and watch it, but like, you could be like, oh yeah, something really peaceful about having that on TV and just doing what you got to do, right? I don't know, but and I'm actually trying to learn how to play that game. I'm doing terrible at it, by the way, but golf is an interesting game. Anyway, Caitlin Clark comes into the WNBA, and there's this big hoopla over how good she is or isn't, and why she's the face of the WNBA, and a whole bunch of envy going on around there. And it really, a few points kind of stick out to me, right? So I can only think of a few reasons why it seems that the WNBA is mad at Caitlin Clark, right? They don't like her, right? One reason is she came in with a following, right? And she came in with a huge following, which also means she came in with making more money than like most of their careers, most of these women made over their careers, period, right? With just endorsements alone, right? She's not getting paid much from the WNBA because the WNBA loses money, right? So there's no money to pay the players if you don't make money. I'll get into that though, right? So, so I'm not assuming, but I can see that they're hating on her because of that. They're envious, right? So they're hating on her because of that. They're hating on her. So she's the face. She's, has money, and unfortunately, they're hating on her because she's white. Like, it's painfully obvious, right? Like, it's just like, why? And here's the cold game that they're playing right now. But I'll look at this from two different perspectives, okay? The first perspective is from a business perspective. It doesn't make any sense for the WNBA as a whole to kind of treat her the way that they have, right? Like, she's bringing attendance. She's bringing viewers, right? So all of sports, no matter which way you look at it, it comes down to this. It's entertainment. Sorry, it is entertainment. And every single athlete or every single team, what have you, they get paid based on how many butts they can put in the seats. That's it, right? Caitlin Clark comes onto the league and comes onto the scene, and she's putting butts in seats. So she probably should be the face. Why? Because the WNBA is trying to make money. I just saw a report that they lost $50 million or projected to lose $50 million. Have they ever made money? And it's just like, again, from a business perspective, it amazes me that the WNBA athletes were sitting there trying to say that they should be paid the same thing as NBA players when the NBA makes upwards of $3 billion a year. like, God, y'all are missing the point. You're missing the point. So let's clear away all the stats, clear away all that stuff, right? And it's just clear away the skills too, because it's not even like you get paid. They don't get paid based on skill, right? You get, like, the skill can lead to butts in seats, but ultimately you get paid on putting butts in the seats. That's what you get paid for, to bring eyes, to bring attention to what you're doing. Therefore, having people pay for that. That's it. So you could ideally be the most skilled person on the face of this planet and not make any money, and it won't matter, right? So it's not. It's just it's almost like the WNBA needs to figure out how business works, and it's just like that's how it works, right? So, and the players within, it's players, coaches, everybody else. Like, you're gonna hate on the thing that's drawing more eyes to what you do. You're cutting your nose off to spite your face. For example, let's. Do you know who Efren Reyes is? I'll give you a second, but because he's one of the most skilled players of all time in pool. You know what his net worth is? After winning over 100 professional tournaments, his net worth is $2 million. Wait. So the amount of skill that this guy has, and the amount of wins, and the amount of and what he has done in his billiards career, that only amounts to $2 million. You would think that he would get at least a $700 million contract, right? No, because no one watches pool. And I mean, I do, and there's few people that do, but who watches what? There are more people who watch baseball and more people who go to baseball games and pack out stadiums. They're not packing out stadiums for pool. It's just so you get paid based on how many eyes you bring to your sport, how many eyes you bring to look at you at your games. Like, how many butts can you get in the seats? That's what it comes down to. And it's just, so I'm getting to the part that really grinds me up, and right, because now you have some of these players who are trying to turn it into a race thing, and that there is no quicker way to get under my skin than to bring up something about race when it has nothing to do with race. And that grinds me up. That grinds me up. So here's the situation. There's seemingly some resentment built up because the WNBA is largely black, and and of a certain sexual orientation, which still is irrelevant. But it's just like, it's largely black, and you have this white girl coming in, and they're saying she's the face of the league when all these other black women have stats. And again, I already explained to you from a business perspective, stats don't matter, right? And I think there's a large portion of what's coming down here is that they're kind of crying racism a little bit because Caitlin Clark is white. But I wonder how many people would be really, really upset. How many of those players would be really that upset if Caitlin Clark was black? All right. So if she were black, would people be saying the same thing? Would people say the same thing? Would they have the same things, that same vitriol, that same resentment built up if she were black? And I'm just like, I'm sorry, that just grinds me up. That grinds me up. Now let's get out of the hypothetical world real quick, right? Because it's just like, there are parallels between this situation and, say, Serena's situation. Serena Williams is arguably one of the greatest female tennis players. Actually, you could say one of the greatest tennis players of all time, period. Hands down. And whenever you talk about great tennis players, she's in the conversation. Like, she's in the conversation even with dudes, right? Like, she is one of the greatest tennis players of all time. She entered the league when she was 14. Now, as far as I understood, at that time, tennis wasn't necessarily black, right? It was mostly a white sport, okay? It was mostly a white sport. She jumped in, dominated, right? But even she faced some racism. I forgot what that one court was that they boycotted. I forgot the name of that course, but I remember, like, she was like, "Nah, I ain't going there." That's traumatizing, and they really was like, "That was some real racist stuff," right? And so then you have somebody, the likes of Serena, who's a female, black female, arguably one of the greatest in her sport, and I make the parallel. And to say that, like, when she entered into the league, it's kind of like the same thing that happened to Tiger. When Tiger first got into the league, or into the golf league, whatever, like, there were some pretty racist things were happening. But in both of those cases, it was the league. Think about that for a second. It was everybody else running their mouth. Tiger wasn't allowed on a few courses. Serena wasn't allowed on some courts and had some bad things happen on others. So you have Caitlin Clark coming into a league as the opposite race, and the league is the one that's crying racism? That's awkward to me, and not at all believable. Sorry, nobody's buying that story, right? It's just like, and it's just like, and the thing about it is, part of what made Serena so great, part of what makes any great so great, and part of what's making Caitlin Clark a superstar, and part of what's making her great, is the fact that Caitlin Clark is a role model. Serena is a role model. Tiger, before he collapsed, was a role model. Name me one person in the WNBA that was actually a role model, that the majority of Americans were looking at their daughters and saying, "Hey, you know what? You could be her." That wasn't there. And that's the problem. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with race. Otherwise, Serena wouldn't have been where she wouldn't have been where she was, and she wouldn't be where she is. You know what I mean? Has nothing to do with race. Has everything to do with y'all just ain't that likable. Sorry. That's the way it is. You know, even when it comes down to, I mean, Caitlin Clark gives master classes as to how to handle pressure and how to handle external forces and continue to move on and continue to try and build a winning team. It's a master class, and she shouldn't know how to do that yet. Right? I'm watching the interviews, post-game interviews, and she's always pumping up her team and saying, hey, we'll get this together. We'll get this figured out. And then people are always trying to bait her. Hey, when are you going to say something to your fans? It's like, I'm not on social media to even say anything to them. Why would I say anything? Everybody, look, I don't know anything about this. All I'm focused on is winning games. I'm focused on playing basketball. And it's just like, so it seems like everybody else is worried about everything else, and she's worrying about winning games, and that's what's separating her. It's just that simple. Just that simple. And we can get into the conversation about stats, and we can go, this person that had this stats and she had this stat and then that stat and so on and so forth. And all that stuff becomes irrelevant at the end of the day, because first of all, you have a rookie coming in there, a rookie with a following, and now you're going to build up. Like, just imagine if Caitlin Clark shows some resilience, and if she ends up becoming, like, living up to that potential that any person can really see, if she ends up living up to that potential, she is the superstar. Period. So I guess overall what I'm saying, and I need to calm down a little bit, this gets me fired up for some reason, right? Well, there's a few reasons, you know, but overall, I think, one, from a business perspective, the WNBA needs to stop looking a gift horse in the mouth. And from an actual, just human, cultural, whatever perspective, however you want to lay the rest of that out, people really need to understand that Caitlin Clark is popular not because of her race, not because of her sexual orientation. It's primarily because she exhibits virtue. And believe it or not, people still will line up to see that story over and over and over again. That's what it is. If you exhibit virtues, people will line up behind you and they will support you. Especially if there's some things that are seen as virtueless, coming at that. So it's oh man. I mean, I hope y'all understand where I'm coming from here, and I hope y'all understand what I'm getting at. It's a shame that we can't just enjoy good athletes doing good things. And, you know, and it's just so interesting now that, you know, the politics have kind of gotten into the sports. And I mean, maybe there was a little bit of that always, right? You know, even going back to like the Olympics from like decades ago or whatever. Just like, I get it, but this one just seems to be weird. It just seems to be weird to me, and it really does grind me up that people are turning it into a race thing. As almost as a cover up for their own envy. And it's just like, just stop. Just think about it for a second. You know, at some point in time, hopefully, you know, clearer heads will prevail. But I don't know. I don't know. So that's what I got for, you know, in terms of, and those are my thoughts, and they're subject to change too, right? You know, by the time I released this episode, you know, things could have completely blown up, or, you know, she could have been, you know, the most welcome person to the league all of a sudden, or I don't know. But right now, as it stands, based on everything that I'm seeing, based on all these hard fouls and all this dumb talk outside of it, and all this race talk and all this stupidity going on. Those are my thoughts on that. So hopefully it gets better. Hopefully it changes. All right. Woo! So that, like I said, was a doozy of an episode. Listen, we went over a lot in this episode. And as always, I appreciate y'all just running with me on this one. I finally got a chance to kind of open up the box a little bit more of what the S.C.A.L method is. And we go over that sound heart. And, listen, if you have any questions or anything like that, I know I said that before, but if you have any questions, if you want some clarification on something, you can hit me up, all right? And as always, I'm going to need you to like, I need you to comment, I need you to subscribe, I need you to share, I need you to get this thing as widespread as possible here, right? Help me out, help me help you. But no, I appreciate y'all. Listen, I'm Coach Evan. This is Say Cheese and Lift Studio, and you just got finished listening to the S.C.A.L Method podcast. I'm going to see y'all on the next one.